And welcome to this morning's presentation on Tax Day. My name is Will Pregman. I'm the Communications Director for Battleborn Progress. And today, of course, is the filing deadline when most federal income tax filings are due for most Americans. But as is evident from our economic reality, not everyone is filing their taxes equally. And today we have some fantastic speakers lined up who are going to address not only the way in which regular Americans are facing steeper tax burdens than the ultra rich and corporations, but how we can address this through President Biden's tax plan, which he has proposed in his latest budget proposal. So today we're joined by Congresswoman Dina Titus, Congressman Stephen Horsford, Don Echelberry, NSCA's president-elect, and Marta Vicente, who is a community member and who's part of our Storyteller program. Each of them are going to speak to you in a moment about the urgent need for tax relief for American families, as well as the need for new minimum taxes on billionaires and large corporations to make sure that they're paying what they owe. Today, Battleborn Progress is also launching a brand new report produced with our partners at Healthcare for America Now, or HCAN, and Americans for Tax Fairness, highlighting the growth and wealth of Nevada billionaires since the start of the pandemic and highlighting the benefit to these ultra wealthy Nevadans paying what they owe to our state. Because of loopholes in the current law, billionaires often pay little to no federal income tax. An expose last year by ProPublica, based on IRS data, revealed that billionaires like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and other top billionaires paid zero federal income tax in recent years. Nevada's 16 billionaires grew 33.6 billion, or 60% richer over the first 2 years of the pandemic, from March 2020 until April 5th, 2022, just earlier this month. Despite their increased wealth, it is likely that these richest people in the state paid little, if any, federal income taxes on these investment gains, unlike working families in Nevada who pay taxes in each paycheck. Nevada billionaires are now worth an estimated $89.8 billion. To give you a few examples, Miriam Adelson, widow of Sheldon Adelson, started her net worth at $26 billion at the start of the pandemic and increased that net worth $1.2 billion, or 4.8%, to a total of $28 billion today. Frank and Lorenzo Fertitta, owners of Station Casinos, who you may recall just lost in court recently trying to union bust the culinary union, started their net worth at about $1.5 billion each, which increased up to $2.7 billion, or by $1.2 billion, roughly 81% since the pandemic. And Elaine Wynn, the owner now of Wynn Casinos, started with $1.4 billion, saw that increase by about $0.4 billion, up 29.7%. Point being, and this will all be detailed in the tax report we'll drop into the chat momentarily, is that this tax day, there is a difference in the approach for how we must go forward in making sure that the wealthy among us are paying their fair share. Right now, we have working Nevadans who still struggle to afford things like rent, groceries, and dealt with these struggles throughout the pandemic. And yet, the ultra wealthy and corporations have made more than their fair share, and it's time that they ought to contribute to the recovery that benefits all of us. So this tax day, we want to highlight that there's a difference in approach between the president and congressional Republicans. The president, Biden, is fighting for tax cuts for the middle class to ensure that the super wealthy and large corporations pay their fair share, while congressional Republicans, led by folks like Senator Scott, are proposing big tax increases for middle-class families. President Biden included a billionaire's income tax within his recent budget proposal, and this plan from President Biden would give tax relief to tens of millions of families, continuing a tax relief. Families are seeing this tax day, and his new budget would apply new minimum taxes on billionaires and large corporations to make sure they're paying their fair share. He wouldn't raise taxes a penny on anyone making less than $400,000 a year. Not only that, but Republican plans circulating in Congress right now would eliminate Social Security and Medicare. The president believes we have a sacred commitment to our nation's seniors, while the Republican plan puts that at risk. That revenue was distributed to the states based on historical levels of federal grants to state budgets. Nevada could gain about $225 million or nearly $350 million a year for 10 years, respectively, from the Biden and Wyden billionaire tax plans. The link to the full report will be included in our chat and sent out with our release following this event. But I would like to take a chance to go over some of the details released in our report. Our executive director, Annette Magnus, in a quote today, says, "For far too long, billionaires in this country and state have gotten away with not paying what they owe in taxes. During the pandemic, we saw how much Nevadans struggled being able to afford basics like groceries and rent. We came together and distributed food out of my garage to help our community get the necessities they needed, while billionaires continued to get richer." This is an example of how Nevada's communities have come together for the purpose of making sure that we have what we need, but it's time for billionaires to be paying what they owe so that that revenue may be used to help build a better future for Nevada at both the federal level and state level. And what we need is to make sure this budget gets approved by Congress so that we can make sure that this revenue ends up in the right place. I want to take time now to introduce our speakers. And if she is ready, I would like to start with our Congresswoman from Congressional District 1, Congresswoman Dina Titus. Congresswoman Titus, if you would go ahead and unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Well, I think I am unmuted, and you introduced me. I am Dina Titus. I represent the 1st District. In Congress, I serve on the Infrastructure and Transportation Committee that's played a large role in helping with our recovery. And so I appreciate being here today to talk about how we can really make it a more equitable recovery. You've said just about everything I was going to cover, Will, so I'm not quite sure what's left to talk about. But let me say this. Nevada was one of the hardest hit places in the whole country by COVID. You know, we have so much dependence on hospitality. And when people don't have a little money in their pocket or don't feel like they can travel safely, they're not going on holiday. And so our unemployment reached 35% at the height of COVID. Now, although we were so hard hit, we are now one of the fastest recovering areas in the country. You can see that in the statistics that are found at the airport, how we're one of the fastest recovering airports. And certainly Stephen and I can tell you, we travel back and forth all the time. The planes are full. Also, our unemployment has dropped from that about 35% down to between 4 and I think maybe 5% now. So that has been a recovery. And all the sporting events that we now have in Las Vegas are bringing people. Our convention business is a little slower recovering, but that's also going on the right path with the new facilities that we have. Nonetheless, we've got a long way to go. We still have people who aren't working. We still have wages that are low. We still have people struggling to put food on the table and pay their bills. One of the things that COVID really highlighted, and maybe this is one good response to that, is that there are great inequities in our country, and they are inbred into laws and policies over a long period of time. And we need to deal with them, whether it's in education or in healthcare or in employment, and as you pointed out, in our tax structure. You know, nobody likes to pay taxes. And that's understandable. But I find that people don't really object if 2 conditions are met. The first is that they know that their tax dollars are going to good causes. There's transparency, there's information available. They know that the causes that are being funded by tax dollars benefit them directly or their community or this country and aren't just siphoned off to help the big corporations or special interests. The second condition that people look at to see about what's happening with taxes is that the structure is fair, that people all pay their fair share, they all pay into the system, and no one group is getting ripped off. Well, as you described, our system is not fair. Over time, it has become a system that really benefits those at the very tip top, not just top, but tip top. Those billionaires are the ones who are paying the least amount of taxes. And if you look at who all the billionaires are, you can see just how much they benefited while others were suffering during COVID. We saw that Nevada billionaires grew their net weight by $33.6 billion, becoming 60% richer over the last 2 years. And then in 2021 alone, American billionaires got $1 trillion richer, or 25% more. This is a system that's just not fair, because on the flip side of all this money that they're making, they're paying very low taxes, both in terms of the rate that they're paying and the amount they're paying. I believe it was Warren Buffett who made the point that his housekeeper was paying more in taxes than he was, and he's a billionaire and she's probably working on minimum wage. So that gets us to the problem of today. When from 2010 to 2018, America's 400 wealthiest billionaires paid an average effective federal income tax rate of only about 8.2%. The average person, the teacher, a police officer, a small business owner, paid 13.3%. So you see the rate is higher, as well as the amount in terms of a percentage of their income. Now, from the beginning, President Biden has talked about building back better, being a more equitable society, investing in the middle class, buying in America, helping lift all ships, not just benefiting a few interest groups. And so he took a bold step, excuse me, and when he put his budget out, and this was the Billionaire Minimum Income Tax. This new measure, I believe, will help to level the playing field, and it will bring down the deficit by $1 trillion over the next decade, and that's always a good thing. The new tax would require the wealthiest American households to pay a minimum of 20%. 20% on all their income, including unrealized investment income that's currently not taxed. And that's where a lot of money with creative bookkeeping is sheltered, so that these top corporations or billionaires don't have to pay tax on it. And so that would be eliminated in the new billionaires tax policy. This tax now, keep in mind, would apply to the top 1/100th of 1%. That's 0.01% of American households. It's not going to apply to our constituents here who are middle America, working folks making under $400,000 a year. You're not going to have to pay any of this tax. So don't let them fool you that Democrats are raising taxes on you, because they are not. It's that very tip top that would pay this tax. And if a wealthy person is already paying that 20%, then he wouldn't, or she wouldn't have to pay any additional amount. If revenue is raised by this amount, and we can get this passed, even though, as you mentioned, Republicans aren't supportive of this, these are their friends and their supporters. They'd rather put tax on the middle class and take away things like the child protect tax credit. But if this were to go in, Nevada could gain about $350 million a year for the next 10 years. So you would see that money come back to the state, again, to be used in programs that benefit people here. I'm supportive of this. I think it's only fair. I'd like to see it pass. It's going to be a battle, so we'll need help from groups like Battleborn Progress to get the word out so that people know really who is affected and that it's not a tax that's going across the board. I see my colleague Stephen Horsford is here with you. He sits on the Ways and Means Committee and is involved in this tax, the nuts and bolts, so he can describe it much better than I am. And we're very fortunate in Nevada to have him in that position. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Congresswoman Titus. Before we go to Congressman Horsford, I did just want to say to Congresswoman Titus, thank you so much for being on with us today and sharing your expertise. We really, really appreciate it. And could you enlighten us just a little bit on what you're seeing with your history in Congress, the negotiations on this bill? How does this budget compare to, say, recent budgets that have been put forward by recent presidents that we may or may not name?
Well, you know, a budget is really a reflection of your values. And I think this budget does reflect the president and the Democrats' values because it puts in place policies that will help deal with some of the inequities. It invests in us here at home. So I think all of that is good. But having a tax like this put into the budget is very bold. But it's in keeping with what the president promised during his campaign. It's in keeping with what the public demands. As I've said originally, people want the tax structure to be fair, and it's not going to put a burden on the folks who have been hurt the most, only on those who are not paying their fair share. So you don't often see real bold moves like this put in a budget presented by the president. Certainly, you didn't see anything like this in the previous administration, except his tax break for the very wealthy.
Terrific. And we did have one question come in from the chat for you, Congresswoman, so I did want to just relay that. We had a question of when would this new tax code start for billionaires under the Biden plan?
Well, let me ask Stephen, when is it scheduled to go into effect?
One of the proposals is to include it in reconciliation, which we are debating how that would move. There's an opportunity to do a budget with the funding coming from this billionaire tax before the end of this year, but that's still to be determined.
Fantastic, thank you. And with that, we will go ahead to our next speaker, who already just chimed in there, Congressman Stephen Horsford. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course, Will, thank you for having me. It's great to be on with my friend and colleague, Dina Titus, a champion on so many important issues and working to make sure that we do recover and we recover in a more equitable way. She represents the heart of Las Vegas and a lot of the hotels where the employment comes from for so many of our hospitality workers and small businesses that rely on those on that investment. So I want to thank her. It's great to be on with her and great to be on with Battleborn. I represent Nevada's 4th Congressional District. Today is tax day, a day, unfortunately, that Americans and people here in Nevada face with a bit of trepidation and anxiety. You know, no one wants to pay more than their fair share. I agree with Congresswoman Titus. Particularly hardworking people understand that in order to have quality schools and to fund public safety, to have the quality of life that so many of us enjoy, we have to be able to invest in that. But what we need to do is to shift from a tax on workers and to require the wealthy to pay their share. So this proposal is about taxing wealth and not work. And I think that is the main message that needs to get out today. As Congresswoman Titus indicated, no one earning less than $400,000 would be taxed. And on this particular proposal, it is squarely on the very top 1/10 of 1%. Under the prior administration, with Republicans in charge of the White House, of the Senate, of the House, they passed the Jobs and Tax Cut Act, which benefited the top 1%. 83% of the benefits went to the very top 1%, not to small businesses, not to middle income Americans, not those who are trying and aspiring to be a part of the middle class. Their tax cut went to the very top. And you know what? They even left some of the middle small businesses out of their proposals because they made them temporary while they gave themselves permanent tax cuts. And now the Democrats are in charge of the White House, of the House, and we have a split in the Senate. Our focus is on delivering for the American people. And the first way that we do that is to tax wealth and not work, to make sure that those at the very top pay their share so that we can all have the quality of life that we enjoy. Now, thanks to the American Rescue Plan, which Congresswoman Titus and I voted for, many Nevadans have already benefited from key provisions in this tax season, including the enhanced child tax credit and the expanded earned income tax credit, as well as some other key provisions that target specifically families. Both of these programs not only reduce or even eliminate the tax burden on many of our workers and families, but they also provide direct assistance by increasing the amount of money that you could get back in your tax return. For example, the enhanced child tax credit was single-handedly responsible for last year's significant decrease in the child poverty rate. If you don't think of anything else, think of the fact that the child tax credit helped to lift nearly 50% of children out of poverty. So it's vital that we continue our push to make sure that that child tax credit program is extended further. Thanks to the American Rescue Plan, there is nothing hypothetical about poverty. We know that it helps ordinary families, particularly those here in Nevada. We know that it dramatically decreases child poverty. We know that it did not cause people to leave the workforce. In fact, employment rates among child tax credit recipients did not drop until after the program expired. The phase-in rule was meant to encourage employment by tying the benefit to income, ensuring that people would not quit their jobs once they started receiving the advanced payments. While that makes sense on the surface, it ignores the realities of parenthood. If your child's school closes and you can't afford childcare, you can't go to work. And that disproportionately affects women and women of color who were faced with that reality. If your child's daycare is closed because of COVID or the shortage of workers, you can't hire a babysitter. And if you can't hire a babysitter, you can't go to work. If your child is sick and you can't afford health care to treat them and you don't have paid leave, you can't go to work. The enhanced child tax credit has meant parents can actually be there for their children as they see fit. Now, we should be encouraging the employment of parents. That's why under this proposal, it's necessary to tax wealth and not work. Empowering parents to make their own decisions about what's best for their children and providing them with the resources to do it has proven to bring parents back to the workplace. Now, do you know how the enhanced child tax credit works? It did more than just increase the amount of money that families get. While that can and did help a number of Nevada families, it would not have decreased child poverty to the extent that it did. It also expanded the program so it covered everyone who needed it. Before we passed the American Rescue Plan, the child tax credit left out 1/3 of children. Among those left out were over half of Black and Hispanic and Latino children, and nearly 3/4 of children raised by single mothers. Last year, it was reported that in Nevada alone, 271,000 children under 17, those previously left out of the full $2,000 credit, benefited from the child tax credit expansion that the Democrats in Congress passed and delivered. Not one Republican in Congress voted for this tax break for families. Of the children in Nevada who weren't eligible for the expansion, 142,000 were Latino, 53,000 were white, 42,000 were Black, and 10,000 were Asian American Pacific Islander, and another 23,000 were classified as multiple or another race. Think about that for a moment. These are the children that are most in need of our help, and the program did not include them prior because of the phase-in rule that meant people with extremely low incomes could not receive the full credit. And those monthly payments families received were only half of the enhanced child tax credit. That's why it's important for people to file your taxes. There's some people that don't want you to file because they don't want you to get the tax credit. This is a tax credit. It's not a handout. It's not an entitlement program. Just like there are embedded provisions in the federal tax code for the very wealthy and big corporations, that's what Republicans protect. Democrats fought to give a tax credit for families. Now, I don't want those 271,000 children in Nevada who are eligible not to get the benefit because they don't file their taxes. You can only receive the second half of the credit if you file your taxes this year. That could be thousands of dollars for some families here in Nevada. Even if you haven't filed your taxes yet, it's not too late. You can file for an extension today to get more time. And once you file your taxes, many workers will also qualify for the earned income tax credit. This credit is worth between $1,500 to over $6,700, depending upon your status. And workers without children qualify too, thanks to the work that Democrats delivered on. Like the child tax credit, the earned income tax credit does not just reduce the amount of taxes that you owe, it can increase your refund, sometimes to more than what you actually paid in taxes. And that's money that you will then have access to cover housing, gas, childcare, healthcare, or whatever else your household needs. For the first time, younger workers ages 19 to 24 and older workers 65 and over without dependent children in Nevada are eligible for the earned income tax credit. This expansion alone means that 168,000 more Nevadans will benefit from this tax credit expansion. Again, something that not one Republican in Congress voted to make happen, but Democrats in Congress working with President Biden did. Now, both of these programs are aimed at reducing the burden on American families and workers. And both of these programs were made more effective by the American Rescue Plan. And I pledge to you that I will continue my work in Congress as a member of the Ways and Means Committee, advocating for all Nevadans and to push that these programs continue to get the support that they need and that we get them over the finish line, including this tax on wealth, not work. But in the meantime, I strongly encourage everyone to take advantage of what we've already delivered on. This tax day does not need to be a burden. Instead, perhaps for the first time in a while, tax day can actually provide relief to a lot of Nevada families. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak, and please file your taxes.
Thank you, Congressman Horsford. I'm still in the process of filing my own taxes. I appreciate that. Can you tell us really quick, you are on the Ways and Means Committee. How can folks get involved to mobilize to help get this over the line, get connected with your office to do that?
Well, you can definitely contact our office. You can go to horsford.mail.house.gov on our website. We have a link about all of the information that I just shared. You can also call us at 702-963-9360. And the one thing I didn't point out, please, if you need to do so, go to a free tax preparer. That's another thing that Congresswoman Titus and I helped to deliver, was more funding for free tax services. So Nevada Free Tax Coalition has a number of sites throughout the Valley who can help you prepare these taxes for free, and they're trained on how to apply for these tax credits for families, the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit and others. So please use that free service.
Thank you. Next, we're going to go to Marta Vicente, and she will be speaking in Spanish. And so our organizer, Brenda Rodriguez, is going to be translating for her. So Marta, if you could please unmute and come on video. And Brenda, if you could do the same. And we'll go ahead and get started when you're ready.
Buenos días. Mi nombre es Marta Vicente. Yo solo quisiera comentar que en mi caso, este año tuve que pagar $2,000 de taxes, y para personas con un sueldo normal como yo, pues eso es mucho dinero. Y sin embargo, hay personas millonarias que para ellos no es nada, y muchas veces ellos no pagan nada de taxes. Eso, pues para mí no es justo. Y así como yo, hay muchas personas. Y sería justo que la ley de los taxes cambiara. Gracias por su atención.
Okay, good morning. My name is Martha Vicente. I just want to comment that in my case this year, I had to pay $2,000 in taxes. And for a person with a normal salary and a working job, it is a lot of money. However, for rich people, it is nothing, and many times not even and many times they don't even pay anything in taxes. That is not fair. And just like myself, there are countless others who are in my position, and it would be extremely fair if the tax laws were fairer and were able to change. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Marta, and thank you, Brenda, for translating that. Last but not least, I want to introduce Dawn Echelberry. She is the president-elect of Nevada State Education Association. Go ahead and take it away, Dawn.
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation. NSCA has been the voice of Nevada educators for over 120 years. On tax day, it is important to remember that tax dollars pay for the important services that communities need, like public education. Today, public education in Nevada is in a crisis. Nevada has long ranked near the bottom of the states in education funding and quality. With the additional challenges of the last 2 years, we now have a frightening shortage of educators to teach our kids and to make our schools run, with thousands of vacancies across the state. This not only hurts the ability to teach our students, but it also makes our schools less safe. The cost of living has bloomed here in Nevada, with housing increasing from 20 to 25% in this past year alone. We have new teachers who cannot find anywhere to live, and thousands of education support professionals who do not make a living wage. That's why NSCA has launched its Time for 20 campaign to address this crisis. Time for 20 means a 20% increase in educator pay, at least $20 an hour for the workers who make our schools run. We must retain high-quality educators and fill our vacant position. With some of the largest class size in the country, Time for 20 means reaching an average class size of 20 students in core academic subjects. This will mean a better education for our students, allowing for more differentiated instruction and competency-based learning. And this will improve our school climate and our safety. But in order to accomplish this, our schools need adequate funding. That's why educators overwhelmingly support progressive taxation. In a recent survey, 86% of our members supported a wealth tax, and overwhelmingly supported other progressive proposals like the Millionaire Income Tax, increasing a game tax, and additional mining tax. When educators who can't afford to pay rent are paying their taxes, it is unconscionable that billionaires are paying nothing at all. It is time to pass the billionaire tax plan in Washington, D.C., and to pass a new progressive revenue here in Nevada as well. Thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Dawn. I would now like to offer the opportunity for press on the call. If you have questions, if you could unmute yourself. I'd like to prioritize for the two members of Congress, just because they got to hop in the next 10 minutes or so. So Jessica, Colo H, or Colton, if you have questions, please come off mute and go ahead. And by the way, the report was dropped there in the chat, and that'll be also sent out in our post-event release. Okay, last call.
Can I just say something real quick?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Forums like this are going to be so important as we move to consider this bill, because I can tell you the other side is going to say, we want to raise taxes. They're not going to say we want to raise taxes on billionaires and not anybody making under $400,000 a year. It's just going to be a blanket. Democrats want to raise taxes. So it's very important that we get out the word of exactly what this bill does and who the taxes are raised on. So that's something that we just got to say it over and over again. And as Stephen so eloquently described, the child tax credit needs to be said over and over again. This is a benefit. You know, that child tax credit, that credit part gets some people confused because it is very arcane, but just it's a benefit. It's a benefit. And this tax structure just goes to those at the very top who aren't paying it now. And the more we can hammer that, I think the better chance we have to get it passed, and the more the public will understand. The teachers get it. You heard that when we want the general public to get it too. So I just emphasize that.
That's an incredibly good point, Congresswoman, and that's something that gets lost sometimes in the messaging, is that we're talking about folks who have multi-billions of dollars. As you'll see in our report, these folks are extremely wealthy, and yes, a lot of that is liquid because it's involved in investments and whatnot, but the fact is they have increased their wealth since the start of the pandemic, while regular Nevadans, like you mentioned, who just work for a living, are paying more in income tax than these people that have multi-billions of dollars. I wanted to, if there are no other questions, I wanted to give people a chance to give some closing remarks. Congresswoman, if you want to add anything to that and explain why it's so necessary that the ultra rich be paying their fair share. If you had any closing remarks, go ahead and.
Well, thank you. I think those were my closing remarks. And I just go back to the point that, yeah, we don't like to pay taxes, but if it can turn into a benefit, it's well worth it. And people will realize that if taxes are used for services that benefit all of us, that's okay. And if everybody pays their fair share, that's okay. So it's not just an anti-tax feeling out there. It's an anti-unfair tax feeling.
That's right. And Congressman Horsford, a closing comment?
Well, I would just reinforce the current federal tax code is rigged for the wealthy against the worker. And under the billionaire tax proposal, we create more equity by making the very wealthy. We focus, I'm not against people being wealthy, but they should pay their fair share. And currently our tax code allows them to evade paying their fair share. Under this proposal, it's a 20% minimum, and wealthy have to pay their share. Many working people pay more than 20% in their federal tax rate. So it's only fair that the wealthy pay theirs, because without that, we continue to have this widening disparity, not only in what people pay, but in what they make and how they are able to take care of their household. So this is an issue of fairness, it's an issue of equity, and it's an issue of closing this widening economic gap that has expanded, and it got worse under the prior administration with Republicans in control of Congress. And we are working to make it more fair and more equitable with Democrats in charge.
Thank you, Congressman. And then finally, President Echelberry, as the voice of educators in Nevada, final thoughts?
Yes, our educators and support staff understand where their taxes go, but it's not fair that it's on their backs to support the services our state needs or our country needs. And when billionaires are not paying and our workers are having to make choices between the children they work with every day and their own families, it's time to pass the billionaires tax. And in our state, it's time for 20.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for joining us this morning. And thank you, members of the press who tuned in. We will send out this release shortly with the report included, so you can review it in totality. It's also linked here in the chat on the call. And please help us spread the word, because it is time for billionaires and the ultra rich to start paying what they owe in federal taxes. And I think we've heard from 2 members of Congress who are fully committed to making that happen, and folks in our state on the community level who work with our communities who desperately need that revenue in order to recover and in order to build a better future for Nevada in accordance with what the agenda the president has outlined and what we're fighting for here in the state. So thank you all very much, and we will close it out. Thanks, everyone, and talk to you all soon.